Blessings of the Triple Gem, Teruan Saranai. Welcome to another Sutta meditation series, Poson, Full Moon Poya livestream. Heartfelt good wishes to everyone joining on this Uposatha day. The title for today's Dhamma session is The Way to the Imperturbable, and this is based on the Āneñjasappāya Sutta, and this is Majjhima Nikaya, Middle-Length Discourses, number 106. The main purpose of today's Uposatha session is to understand the context for the Buddha's teaching in this discourse and to examine how we can master the Buddha's step-by-step instructions on sensual pleasures, the imperturbable concentrations, and develop all the way to noble liberation. There are definitely similarities as well as differences in this discourse to the Buddha's teaching in the Chula Sunyata Sutta and the Sunakata Sutta, as well as the Salayatana Vibhanga Sutta and other similar teachings. And we may draw on some of what we've learned before, as well as draw on other Dhammas that we have penetrated from other suttas to help us in this session. Let's begin by paying homage to the Triple Gem. We can bow our heads and Anjali. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dhamma, and homage to the Noble Sangha. Let's now have a quick look at what we'll cover in this session. So as usual, how to get the best out of this session, a few tips and reminders. Then we'll look at what is āneñja and the context for this teaching. Then after that, we'll look at examples of the Buddha and the imperturbable concentrations. And we'll have a look at the sutta architecture to give an overview of this Āneñjasappāya Sutta. Then after that, we'll deep dive into the Buddha's gradual teaching on sensuality, the higher concentrations, and noble liberation. And towards the end of our session, we'll read out some of the Buddha's words about investigating as encouragement towards developing the meditations. And then at the end, we'll share merit and the blessings. So how to get the best out of this session? Let's go over our tips and reminders. So the first one is to keep an open mind. So as always, come at the Buddha's words fresh. Let's be open and attentive to what he says in this particular discourse, and also the explanations on how to contemplate and develop our mind. Also be okay with not understanding everything. This is a particularly advanced sutta, so whatever is possible to understand or to connect in terms of what we've learned before, that's a good thing. And try to practice during this session to contemplate and see what's needed right now. And of course, the rest will come later. Remember that we're all learners, that we're here to lean on each other, to make effort towards developing the Noble Eightfold Path, and we're certainly walking this path together. And apply yourself to the contemplations. We won't have specific meditation periods because it's quite a long sutta and a lot of description about how to contemplate. But during the session, give yourself the opportunity to contemplate the Dhamma, and don't just listen, but also try and apply your own examples, because this is how we connect with the Dhamma. As we always say, it's a wisdom pathway, and we see the Dhamma directly through applying our own examples and gaining direct insight. And so when we see the Dhamma, we also see the Buddha. And when we see the Buddha, we see the Dhamma. And so have good wishes for everyone, those who are online right now, but also anyone who has helped us up until this point on our spiritual path. So it's good to start with the question of what is āneñja? And there are a number of words on this slide, and we can go to the Pali Canon as well. Āneñja has been translated usually as imperturbable. However, it can also be translated as unshakable, not movable, steadfast, extreme calm, vast stillness, a certain level of equanimity, and very peaceful. So we get the picture that it is the development or purification of the mind to higher states where increasingly it doesn't shake or move. And so when you think about it, what we usually inhabit in our daily life is not this kind of mental state, not this imperturbable state. In reality, our minds are usually shaking. They're agitated, they're not calm, not still, and not peaceful. And how do we know this? Because Most of our thoughts are imbued with greed, hatred, and delusion, things we carry with us from work or other activities, certain relationships, and usually our minds are imbued with mental stains or defilements. And therefore, there's many objects in our mind that we've grasped onto, and we have to purify when we sit down to meditate. So each time we sit down to meditate or do walking meditation, whatever posture that is, we try to calm and concentrate the mind. But what greets us is this cacophony of all kinds of thoughts, and so you can see the mind is shaking. So as we delve into the Buddha's teachings, we find Buddha's instructions on how to gradually develop the mind towards the imperturbable, the way to methodically enter into states where the mind is increasingly incapable of being disturbed. In other words, stillness, calm, steadfastness, imperturbable. So this is what the Buddha means by āneñja. Now in the Sunakata Sutta, which we have already examined in a previous session, and now in this Āneñjasappāya Sutta, the Buddha refers to imperturbable in more specific terms. In these two suttas, he refers to them as attaining to the fourth jhana, and also the base of infinite space, and the base of infinite consciousness as the imperturbable concentrations. However, in the greater context of understanding the imperturbable, we can acknowledge that realizing complete liberation is the highest possible form of imperturbability, where we no longer shake at all, the stilling of volitional formations. And so this is the quality that is ultimately reached by an arahant, where the arahant has stilled all volitional formations and is completely peaceful and sublime. So by examining Āneñjasappāya Sutta, what we'll learn is the various ways to the imperturbable, all the way up to noble liberation, to Nibbana. And the Buddha is essentially helping us to further develop the pathway of renunciation. What we will see is his encouragement towards methodically, step by step, accessing more refined, constructed states that are increasingly more stable and steadfast. But at the same time, he's also encouraging us to view these higher states with wisdom, so we don't misapprehend them. Through teachings such as this one and numerous others, it's quite evident the Buddha wanted us to experience these higher states as a pathway of renunciation, not to bypass them. And with each constructed state, to know directly for ourselves, to experience how we can become less easily disturbed, more unshakable, more peaceful, and leaning towards Nibbana. And in this teaching, the Buddha clarifies when we reach the highest level of concentration, which is the base of neither perception nor non-perception, why one does or does not realize Nibbana or ultimate liberation. So that's a question that Venerable Ānanda asks at the end of this sutta. So what is very, very important to see is the Buddha is taking us through the higher training in virtue, concentration, and wisdom. When the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths in his first discourse, known as the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, and when he explained about noble truth of suffering, he stated, now this, bhikkhus, is the noble truth of suffering. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering. Union with what is displeasing is suffering. Separation from what is pleasing is suffering. Not getting what one wants is suffering. In brief, the five aggregates subject to clinging are suffering. And that last part, the five aggregates subject to clinging are suffering, is what we continuously contemplate to sharpen our wisdom faculty. This is so we can understand the arising and passing away phenomena, which is noble and penetrative, which the Buddha has stated would lead to the complete destruction of suffering. So part of penetrating this wisdom is to contemplate how clinging to volitional formations or activities, our sankharas, is suffering. So the context for the Buddha's teaching in this Āneñjasappāya Sutta and also the Chulasunyata Sutta and similar teachings can be understood when we really begin to deeply understand that volitional formations construct consciousness. So one of the suttas that helps us is this Parivimansana Sutta. This is Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 12, discourse number 51. Now, in this particular teaching by the Buddha, he emphasized the importance of making thorough investigation. So he said in Pali, Parivimansaya, for the utterly complete destruction of suffering. And to do so is to understand dependent origination, so paticcasamuppada. And of course, in this particular sutta, he outlines the pathway for dependent origination in this Parivimarsana Sutta. And part of what the Buddha taught that is pertinent to our session today is this. As he thoroughly investigates, he understands thus: volitional formations have ignorance as their source, ignorance as their origin. They are born and produced from ignorance. When there is ignorance, volitional formations come to be. When there is no ignorance, volitional formations do not come to be. He understands volitional formations, their origin, their cessation, and the way leading on that is in conformity with their cessation. He practices that way and conducts himself accordingly. This is called a bhikkhu who is practicing for the utterly complete destruction of suffering, for the cessation of volitional formations. Now this part is where we need to wisely contemplate. It says, bhikkhus, if a person immersed in ignorance generates a meritorious volitional formation, consciousness fares on to the meritorious. If he generates a demeritorious volitional formation, consciousness fares on to the demeritorious. If he generates an imperturbable volitional formation, consciousness fares on to the imperturbable. But when a bhikkhu has abandoned ignorance and aroused true knowledge, then with the fading away of ignorance and the arising of true knowledge, he does not generate a meritorious volitional formation or a demeritorious volitional formation or an imperturbable volitional formation. Since he does not generate or fashion volitional formations, he does not cling to anything in the world. Not clinging, he is not agitated. Not being agitated, he personally attains Nibbana. He understands, destroyed his birth, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done. There is no more for this state of being. The key part of what we need to acknowledge here is our volitional formations, which form our karma-generating activities. So these fall into three categories, as it's said here, which is meritorious volitional activity. So this is the punya abhisankara, the demeritorious volitional activity, apunya abhisankara, and the imperturbable volitional activity, āneñja abhisankara. So out of ignorance, if we continue to generate meritorious volitional activity, it will result in consciousness faring on to the sensual or form spheres of existence. If we continue to generate demeritorious volitional activity, it will result in consciousness faring on only to the sensual spheres of existence. And then lastly, and this is pertinent to this particular discourse we're looking at today, if we continue to generate imperturbable volitional activity, it will result in consciousness faring on to the formless spheres of existence. And this is what Buddha highlights in this Āneñjasappāya Sutta as he shows us different ways of attaining to those states. So it is imperturbable volitional activity and the resulting imperturbable concentration that many misapprehend as Nibbana. So this was true at the time of the Buddha and is still the case now. And the two examples that come to mind from the time of the Buddha are Alara Kalama, whose teachings led on to the attainment of the base of nothingness, and also Uddaka Ramaputta, whose teachings led to the attainment of the base of neither perception or non-perception. And having renunciated lay life, both were teachers that the Buddha as the Bodhisattva had spent time with and mastered their teachings before taking leave to continue. So when he had left the royal household, he was an ascetic, and so he went on his noble search. So after mastering teachings of these teachers to the base of nothingness and to the base of neither perception or non-perception, he continued his search. And so once he realized enlightenment, and after being invited to Brahma Sahampati to preach the Dhamma, the fully enlightened Buddha thought of these two particular teachers as being fit to teach. And unfortunately, both of them had already passed away. But it is something to bear in mind that he thought those two were fit to teach. Now, if we have noble aspiration to realize Nibbana, or to lean towards Nibbana, then we don't want to get caught in misapprehending these attainments as Nibbana. Instead, we can develop in accordance with the Buddha's instructions, and we can still our volitional formation so we do not cling or agitate for anything and realize Nibbana in an ultimate sense. By having these qualities, in terms of being easy to instruct, and we bring this up quite a lot in terms of suvacha in Pali, being easy to instruct. There are 16 qualities. Then it helps us to diligently follow the Buddha's method of instructions, or in this particular sutta or in other similar teachings. So what happens is when we're suvacha and we diligently follow them, we can directly experience in a step-by-step manner what the Buddha has taught, what he has seen through, and in many ways the shortcuts, and to not make the mistake of clinging to very refined and stable constructed states, identifying with them, and they will keep us bound to samsara and this whole mass of suffering. So we can also use the pathway to renunciation that the Buddha has given in Salayatana Vibhanga Sutta also to help us to connect with this Dhamma before we launch into the sutta, because we've examined this before in our session on the Mahachattarisika Sutta on how to develop noble concentration. And when you look at this particular pathway, what this depicts is consistent across the Buddha's teachings, which starts with really contemplating in accordance with the Buddha's instructions to abandon sensual pleasures and defilements. And this is something that we are going to do today, but using different instructions. And by doing so, we can enter into the jhanas, which are the most stable attainment, being the fourth jhana. And in this case, on this particular slide, it says it's represented here by renunciant equanimity. So when we understand that from the fourth jhana, we can cross to the threshold to go beyond gross form, where it's not so apparent, and enter into more stable constructed states or concentration levels, such as the base of infinite space, the base of infinite consciousness, which the Buddha terms imperturbable in Āneñjasappāya Sutta, and then to the base of nothingness, and also the base of neither perception or non-perception. So we get increasingly more refined and increasingly more subtle. And so this is represented on this slide as equanimity that is unified. So renunciant equanimity, and then equanimity that is unified. And then by developing further, we abandon even these more stable constructed states, so equanimity that is unified, with the support of non-identification, attama yattang, or not identifying or conceiving of the five aggregates as me and mine. And so we can realize Nibbana. So that's the usual pathway of renunciation that the Buddha talks about. And it follows the same kind of trajectory in this Āneñjasappāya Sutta. So the key is always to see how these states are constructed. What we'll go through today is, again, how they arise and how they pass away, how they are not permanent and lasting despite being very, very stable and calm, and not to be identified with, so not to be taken as me and mine. So if we can know and see this directly, then we would keep developing towards Nibbana rather than clinging to even subtle states. And so in this Āneñjasappāya Sutta, the Buddha follows the same pathway, though he gives similar but different ways to contemplate. And he gives quite a significant number of ways in this particular sutta for us to contemplate. So I thought it was good to show some examples of the Buddha actually dwelling in these imperturbable concentrations. So the first one is how the Buddha would often encourage others to develop the imperturbable concentration, and he would practice it himself. So one good example is in this Yosoja Sutta. This is in the Udana 3.3. And this is where a group of 500 visiting bhikkhus were making a huge racket as they were setting up their lodgings in order to put away their robes and bowls. And the Buddha reproved their behavior, and he sent this group of 500 bhikkhus away from his vicinity. So the group of 500 bhikkhus departed, and they decided to practice diligently and well. And so they decided to dwell secluded in a way that would gratify the Buddha. And so as a result, by the end of the vasa, every single bhikkhu of the 500 became accomplished in knowledge. So they had the three knowledges of remembering past lives, the knowledge of arising and passing away of living beings, and the knowledge of the destruction of the taints. So tevijja. When the Buddha became aware of this, he requested they come back to see him. And so when the group of bhikkhus arrived, this is what they observed. Now at the time, the Blessed One was sitting in imperturbable concentration. The thought occurred to the monks, "Now in which mental dwelling is the Blessed One now residing?" Then they realized, "He is residing in the imperturbable dwelling." So they all sat in imperturbable concentration. And then in the sutta it was stated that Venerable Ānanda spoke to the Buddha 3 times during each watch of the night to request the Buddha to greet the visiting group of monks who had been sitting there for a long time. And each time the Buddha remained silent. And eventually the Buddha emerged from his imperturbable concentration and said to Venerable Ānanda, "Ānanda, if you had known, not even that much would have occurred to you to say, I, along with all the 500 of these monks, have been sitting in imperturbable concentration." So this is one clear example of the Buddha and the Sangha sitting in imperturbable concentration. Clearly they were not disturbed or shaken, even though Venerable Ānanda had spoken 3 times during the night. And the other one that is very famous is, of course, the Buddha's parinibbana. When the Buddha attained parinibbana, his final extinguishment, it was stated in the Digha Nikaya, the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. Then the Blessed One entered the 1st jhana, and leaving that he entered the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th jhana. Then leaving the 4th jhana, he entered the sphere of infinite space, then the sphere of infinite consciousness, then the sphere of nothingness, then the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. And leaving that, he attained the cessation of feeling and perception. At that point then, the Venerable Ānanda said to Venerable Anuruddha, "Venerable Anuruddha, the Blessed One has attained final Nibbana." And he says, "No, friend Ananda, the Blessed One has not attained final Nibbana. He's attained the cessation of feeling and perception." Then the Buddha, the Lord, leaving the attainment of the cessation of feeling and perception, entered the sphere of neither perception or non-perception. From that he entered the sphere of nothingness, the sphere of infinite consciousness, the sphere of infinite space. From the sphere of infinite space he entered the 4th jhana. From there the 3rd, the 2nd, and the 1st. Leaving the 1st he entered the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, and leaving the 4th, the Blessed One finally attained final Nibbana. So these examples from the Pali Canon are encouragement and inspiration for us to gradually train, gradually practice and make progress by following Buddha's instructions. So if we do so, then we can also gain the fruit and benefit of this noble path. So let's now look at the sutta architecture for Āneñjasappāya Sutta, because it gives us this bird's eye view of what we can expect when we deep dive into the discourse. So what we can see on this slide is that it can be broken down into 5 parts. So it starts with the opening statement to the bhikkhus on sensual pleasures. Then the second part is where the Buddha starts teaching on the 3 ways directed to the imperturbable. Then the third part is the Buddha's teaching on the 3 ways directed to the base of nothingness. Then the 4th path is the Buddha's teaching on the way directed to the base of neither perception or non-perception. And then the 5th part is Buddha's answers to Venerable Ānanda's questions on Nibbana and of course on noble liberation. So this is an advanced teaching given by the Buddha. And so as we get to the higher concentrations, what we'll see is that it's always possible to go deeper and deeper into the Dhamma. But for this session, I'll try to reference meditations that we have developed before, as well as to try and simplify rather than complicate some of the explanations. If there are any errors, this will be on my part, not with the Buddha's wise words. Let's now deep dive into the sutta. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living in the Kuru country, where there was a town of the Kurus named Dhamma. There the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus: "Bhikkhus, Venerable Sir," they replied. The Blessed One said this: "Bhikkhus, sensual pleasures are impermanent, hollow, false, deceptive. They are illusory, the prattle of fools. Sensual pleasures in this life and sensual pleasures in lives to come, sensual perceptions in this life and sensual perceptions in lives to come, both alike are Mara's realm, Mara's domain, Mara's bait, Mara's hunting ground. On account of them, these evil, unwholesome mental states such as covetousness, ill will, and competition arise, and they constitute an obstruction to a noble disciple in training here." So if we were to compare the Chula Sunyata Sutta, which we've studied before, to this one of the key differences is the Buddha's emphasis on the danger in sensual pleasures or sensuality. This is really the central focus at the core of the Buddha's powerful teaching in this sutta. And it is because sensuality is rooted in greed, and it's what assails us throughout this whole path. So let's dissect the Buddha's words here. So in Pali, the first statement is Anicca bhikkhave kama, tucca, musa, mosa dhamma, maya katametang bhikkhave, bala lappanang. So bhikkhu, sensual pleasures are impermanent, hollow, false, deceptive. They are illusory, the prattle of fools. Now, rather than what the Buddha has stated here, we operate on a daily basis believing sensual pleasures are permanent, that they're substantial, even valuable, that there's truth and they're not deceptive. We're taken in by their appearance, and we prattle like fools about them. So we can take any number of examples to prove that, from material possessions to food to the people in our lives, and more from that. So there's a teaching in the Anguttara Nikaya where the Buddha has spoken about different ways of practice, and one of them is called coarse or rough way of practice. And in Pali, this is āgalha patipata. And he references sensual pleasures here because he says someone who has that way of practice is someone holds the doctrine or view there is no fault in sensual pleasures and then indulges in sensual pleasures. So this is what is meant by coarse or rough way of practice. So in our daily lives, we are usually operating from this coarse or rough way of practice. Now, if we come back to sensual pleasures are impermanent, hollow, false, deceptive, illusory, and the prattle of fools, we go through that. Buddha is saying that these sensual pleasures are impermanent, so they're anicca. That means they don't last. When we are enticed by sensual pleasures or sensuality, we think it's pleasing or attractive, so we take it as subha. Then we think it will last, it's nicca. And we think that we get some pleasure from it, so we take it as sukha. And then, of course, we think it's worth taking as me and mine, atta. This is what we know from the arising phenomena of form when we practice the Samadhi Bhavana Sutta. But if we see that sensual pleasures are actually foul or unattractive, so we're actually looking at profitable perceptions of sensual pleasures or form, we see it as a asubha, that it has a death-bound nature, meaning it does not last, so it's anicca sanya, that it's actually suffering, that we have the dukkha sanya rather than the sukha sanya, then we know it's not worth taking as me and mine. So we comprehend the passing away phenomena. So that's how we see impermanence, that sensual pleasures are impermanent. Then the Buddha says they're also hollow, tucca, meaning they're empty, void, there's no real substance to them. So if we can remember the simile of the lump of foam that the Buddha has given, that for whatever kind of form, including sensual pleasures, the Buddha says in the Penna Pindupama Sutta that a man with good sight would inspect it, ponder it, carefully investigate it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, and insubstantial. For what substance could there be in a lump of foam? So too, bhikkhus, whatever kind of form there is, whatever past, future, present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, a bhikkhu inspects it, ponders it, and carefully investigates it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in form? So this is the way we're meant to see sensual pleasures, that they're hollow. There's no substance to it, like that lump of foam. And with foam, you always see that it disintegrates. It's there for a moment, washing up to shore, or even like soap suds, and then it disappears. And then the third term that Buddha uses is, or third and fourth is, musa mosa dhamma, false and deceptive. So if we can remember what the Buddha said in Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta, when we looked at the elements, when we make the determination of truth, the saccaditthana, the Buddha says what is false has a deceptive nature, what is true has an undeceptive nature, and that is nibbana. So what this means is we need to see how sensual pleasures are actually false and deceptive in nature. And if we are taken in by them, they obstruct us from nibbana. And then the next term is that they are illusory, maya katametang. Basically, they're not what we think they are. They are created by trickery or illusion. And this is where what we have learned about the unprofitable perceptions really kicks in to help us when we look at profitable perceptions instead of these unprofitable ones, then it's really helpful to us. So if we take an example, When we're taken in by the external wrapping of sensual pleasures, then we think there is beauty, attractiveness, or something pleasing. We take subhasanya, but that's the illusion. So when we actually contemplate the profitable perception that it's unattractive or foul, asubhasanya, we break the illusion. So for example, if we take this body, we look at it, we dress it with clothes and everything, and if we have youthful skin, it seems very, very attractive. But if we contemplate 32 parts of the body and see the body parts as foul or unattractive, unclean, then it breaks the illusion about this body. Or if we contemplate the body as a boil, similar to the Ganda Sutta, we see the 9 openings that ooze and discharge the impurities that are unclean, has a stench and is disgusting, then it breaks the illusion. And so there are other profitable perceptions that we've spoken about, such as the contemplation of death, the repulsiveness of food, non-delight in the entire world. All these things help to break the illusion. And then the last term that the Buddha says is bala lappanang in Pali, which is the prattle of fools. In other words, it's the babbling, the prattling, the muttering of fools. And this is someone who is caught up in the lies, the deception, the illusion of sensual pleasures. We don't often realize how much of a problem this last one really is. Most of the time we think conversation about sensual pleasures is harmless. But if we take an example such as talking with friends and say we've never left the country before, and they start prattling on about how amazing this place they went to, they visited, and they've come back, and they tell us about the beautiful and wondrous sights, the delicious foods, and on, what happens to us when we hear those words? Naturally, we would want to go and check out the place our friend is talking about to see if what they say is true. We get enticed. We develop these sensual perceptions. And so what arises in our mind that wasn't there before are sensual perceptions which push us to go and look at pictures. It escalates to making plans and eventually to book a ticket to go and see for ourselves. So we allow consciousness to steady on these sensual perceptions, which are really unprofitable or sick perceptions, because at that point we're seeing subha, we're seeing nicca, we're seeing sukha, and then if we go on that holiday, we take it as me and mine. So that's when the unskilled states that the Buddha talks about here, where he says, on account of them, these evil, unwholesome mental states such as covetousness, ill will, and competition arise. So that's what gets activated. So we've all probably experienced what we could term FOMO, so fear of missing out. In the past, or maybe even now, if our family and friends have experienced something that we haven't, or our colleagues, it can trigger covetousness. We want to have the same experience, not to feel left out, not to be outdone. Our sensual perceptions are coming from wrong view, thinking, oh, there's beauty, there's something pleasing about that place, or whatever sensual object it is everyone is talking about. Ill will gets activated due to the aging phenomena, and the wrong view we have is the condition for competition to arise. We start to play the game of one-upmanship, and what we see is the seemingly harmless prattle of fools enables all these unskilled states to arise, and it leads on to misconduct. And so this applies to many different conversations that we've had in the past, even from when we were very young, and to the different kinds of people in our lives telling us things and giving us their evaluations, their descriptions, their delight about such and such sensual things. So it can be about places, objects, people, food, all the sensual things. But the crux of what the Buddha is saying when he says the prattle of fools is that this type of prattle we must see is infused with the lies about sensual pleasures, not the truth. Only those who have seen the truth would not prattle on like a fool about sensual pleasures. So the arahants would only listen to wise words. They would not associate with fools. So we must remember that. So what this reminds us of is the Buddha's words in the Nibbedika Sutta, where he said, lustful thought or intention is a person's sensual pleasure. So in Pali, this is sankappa rago purisasa kamo. And the Buddha makes the point that the pretty things in the world are not sensual pleasures. And he repeats, lustful thoughts or intention is a person's sensual pleasures. Sankappa rago purisasa kamo. The key to what he's saying here is that It's our lustful or greedy or sensual thoughts that are really our sensual pleasures, and we make plans around that. So the Buddha encouraged, saying the wise would remove the desire for them. So this is why we need to contemplate the arising and passing away phenomena, to remove our desire or craving for sensual pleasures. So in this sutta, the Buddha says, sensual pleasures in this life and sensual pleasures in lives to come, sensual perceptions in this life and sensual perceptions in lives to come, both alike are Mara's realm, Mara's domain, Mara's bait, and Mara's hunting ground. Here the Buddha has highlighted sensual pleasures and sensual perceptions. So this is this particular paragraph here. So in the Alagadupama Sutta, and this is the sutta where the Buddha talks about the simile of the snake, so Majjhima Nikaya discourse number 22, the Buddha had stated, bhikkhus, that one can engage in sensual pleasures without sensual desires, without perceptions of sensual desire, without thoughts of sensual desire. That is impossible. So that is why Buddha is talking about both sensual pleasures and sensual perceptions, that they are connected, they are linked. And so what this means is when we desire or crave sensual pleasures, we have sensual perceptions arising towards the forms, towards the sounds, towards the odors, towards the tastes, towards the tangibles, and sensual thoughts. What happens at that point is we don't have clear comprehension or awareness. We have asampajanya towards sensual pleasures. So we go out through our sense faculties expecting to experience pleasure. And so we become tied to what the Buddha calls karma guna, which is the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. And so this is the desire or craving. I've read in the Maha Nidesa, particularly around the discourse on sensual pleasures, is this craving becomes the basis for suffering, which we know from Paticca Samuppada, that craving is the origin of suffering. It's the basis for suffering. So this is what it means by Mara's snare, Mara's bait, Mara's domain, the river of craving, the net of craving, the leash of craving, the ocean of craving. Covetousness, greed is the unwholesome root. To take that a little further, there's a sutta where the Buddha highlighted these 5 chords of sensual pleasure, and this is the Pasarasi Sutta, also in Majjhima Nikaya discourse number 26. And with respect to sensual pleasures, the Buddha taught, bhikkhus, there are these 5 chords of sensual pleasure. What 5? Forms cognizable by the eye that are wished for, desired, agreeable, likable, connected with sensual desire, and provocative of lust. Sounds cognizable by the ear, and the same thing, odors cognizable by the nose, flavors cognizable by the tongue, tangibles cognizable by the body, that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire, and provocative of lust. These are the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. As to those recluses and Brahmins who are tied to these 5 chords of sensual pleasure, infatuated with them and utterly committed to them, and who use them without seeing the danger in them or understanding the escape from them, it may be understood of them. They have met with calamity, met with disaster. The evil one may do with them as he likes. And then he gives this simile. Suppose a forest deer who is bound lay down on a heap of snares. It might be understood of him, he has met with calamity, met with disaster. The hunter can do with him as he likes, and when the hunter comes, he cannot go where he wants. So too, as to those recluses and Brahmins who are tied to these 5 chords of sensual pleasure, it may be understood of them. They have met with calamity, met with disaster. The evil one may do with them as he likes. So as the Buddha has said, when we become tied to the 5 chords of sensual pleasure, basically we become ensnared and we meet with disaster and calamity. What we haven't understood about Mara's hunting ground, that whatever forms we see through our eye is also what Mara can see. Whatever sounds we hear through our ear is also what Mara can hear. Whatever odors we smell through our nose is also what Mara can smell. Whatever flavors we taste through our tongue is also what Mara can taste. And whatever tangibles we experience through our body is also what Mara can experience. And as a result, we continually encounter Mara's bait. Whenever we attempt to break free from sensual pleasures, these baits are dangled in front of us, making it difficult to get out of Mara's realm and domain. In other words, whether we realize or not, we are trapped in Mara's snare or imprisoned in Mara's cage. And so this calamity and disaster, these are the results that are arising, which we call unwholesome or unskilled states, our misconduct, and therefore our suffering. And interestingly, we should point out that Mara, in terms of Mara, we always reference it as this young Deva Mara, Devaputta Mara, but it can also refer to Maras of the aggregates, so Kanda Mara or defilements, Kiles Mara, volitional activities, Abhisankara Mara, and also death, so Machu Mara. So these are the things that encompass Mara. So when you think about when we indulge in sensual pleasures and certain things arise in our mind, then that is actually Kiles Mara that is arising, unskilled states. So don't forget as well that there are 10 armies of Mara that's described in Padana Sutta. So this is in Sutta Nipata. This first one, the first army is actually sensual pleasures. So when you realize that the first army is sensual pleasures, it becomes imperative that we understand the true nature of sensual pleasures and that they keep us bound to samsara. So in that sutta we read out where the Buddha was meditating in the imperturbable and the group of bhikkhus came and also meditated in the imperturbable, so that's the Yasoja Sutta. At the end of that discourse, I didn't read this out, but the Buddha actually stated, who has mastered the thorn of sensuality, abuse, punishment, imprisonment, that bhikkhu stands steady as a mountain, desireless, not perturbed by pleasures and pains. So it's really about mastering sensuality, mastering sensual pleasures. So now we can see and understand a little bit more why the Buddha is putting sensual pleasures or sensuality as at the core of this Āneñjasappāya Sutta. And just for completeness, the other armies, just in case you're interested, of Mara are discontent, hunger and thirst, craving, dullness and drowsiness, cowardice, which is associated with terror, doubt, derogation and obstinacy, gain honor and praise and wrongly obtain fame, and the last one is extolling oneself and looking down on others. So when we start to realize the magnitude of what we're dealing with, then it's rather shocking how heavily our lives are caught up in Mara's realm, Mara's domain, Mara's bait, and Mara's hunting ground. Like when you really take some time to contemplate it, it's quite shocking. And so it's only when we contemplate Buddha's wise words and have a go at his instructions to develop the Noble Eightfold Path and develop other parts of the path, the other enlightenment path factors, that we genuinely see we have the opportunity to free ourselves. So in this Pasarasi Sutta, the Buddha then taught how we blindfold Mara. And this is interesting as we start to go deeper into Āneñjasappāya Sutta. He says, suppose the forest deer is wandering in the forest wilds. He walks confidently, stands confidently, sits confidently, lies down confidently. Why is that? Because he is out of the hunter's range. So too, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought, or thought and examination, with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. And so we know from the Anapuba Nirodha Sutta that when one attains to the first jhana, sensual perceptions have ceased. And so the Buddha confirms this in the Pasarasi Sutta by saying, the bhikkhu is said to have blindfolded Mara, to have become invisible to the evil one by depriving Mara's eye of its opportunity. So the Buddha then repeats the same for entering and abiding in the second jhana, the third jhana, the fourth jhana, the base of infinite space, the base of infinite consciousness, the base of nothingness, the base of neither perception or non-perception, and the cessation of perception and feeling. And so he ended by saying, in an ultimate sense, when his taints are destroyed by seeing with wisdom, this bhikkhu is said to have blindfolded Mara, to have become invisible to the evil one by depriving Mara's eye of its opportunity, and to have crossed beyond attachment to the world. He walks confidently, stands confidently, sits confidently, lies down confidently. Why is that? Because he is out of the evil one's range. And so this is how we can understand what the Buddha has taught here, why the Buddha keeps encouraging us to take viveka. Like when he said to even lay people, he was saying, go and take seclusion. And so when we think about not just physical seclusion, like last Poya, we were talking about being heirs in the Dhamma, that we take kaya viveka, but we also need to take chitta viveka and upadi viveka. And in the case of this Āneñjasappāya Sutta, the focus is really on chitta viveka, and then it leads to the relinquishment of all upadis. So these are, in terms of chitta viveka, we're talking about the jhanas, we're talking about the higher attainments. And so in this way, we start to avoid sensual pleasures by suppression. And when we attain to path and fruit, we have noble attainment, then we avoid sensual pleasures by eradication, which is much stronger. And so if we don't develop these things, what will happen is we'll be at the mercy of the dangers and calamities of this Mara's realm, Mara's domain, Mara's bait, Mara's hunting ground, samsara. So the teachings of what is in this Āneñjasappāya Sutta become very helpful and beneficial to us. So let's now look at the first of the 3 ways directed to the imperturbable. Therein, bhikkhus, a noble disciple considers thus: sensual pleasures in this life and sensual pleasures in lives to come, sensual perceptions in this life and sensual perceptions in lives to come, constitute an obstruction to a noble disciple in training here. Suppose I were to abide with a mind abundant and exalted, having transcended the world and made a firm determination with the mind. When I do so, there will be no more evil, unwholesome mental states, such as covetousness, ill will, and competition in me. And with the abandoning of them, my mind will be unlimited, immeasurable, and well developed. When he practices in this way and frequently abides thus, his mind acquires confidence in this base. Once there is full confidence, he either attains to the imperturbable now, or else he resolves upon it with wisdom. On the dissolution of the body after death, it is possible that the evolving consciousness may pass on to rebirth in the imperturbable. This because is declared to be the first way directed to the imperturbable. Here the Buddha has instructed us to contemplate how we are in Mara's cage, that it is due to these sensual pleasures and sensual perceptions in this life and in lives to come. If we see that our desire or craving for sensual pleasures, all the defilements that arise, such as covetousness, ill will, and so on, and then it leads to misconduct by body, speech, and mind, so it keeps us bound to samsara. What's important to recognize is how the mind is constantly disturbed or agitated. It's shaking. There's no peace, no calm when it's imbued with sensuality. We know that. So we can take an example from our daily life, whether it's to do with our career, our job, or running a business, or having a family, or wanting certain material possessions. All the different permutations that arise from lay life and our association with sensual pleasures. And the key is to see how we usually suffer from these things. So no matter what we do, we get caught. And even when we give up some of the sensuality and devote more of our time and efforts towards Dhamma, there's still covetousness, ill will, and competition. So rather than worldly things, we still covet Dhamma knowledge, Dhamma teachers, Dhamma groups, invitations, praise, popularity, even the fruits of meditation and the attainments. So we can have ill will towards others on the basis of these things, and we can still get defeated even in those battles or unspoken competition. And so we can also suffer immensely. So when we realize, then we don't want to stay in Mara's cage. We don't want to be bound to Mara's realm, Mara's domain, Mara's bait, Mara's hunting ground. And so we can use the verse, sensual pleasures are impermanent, hollow, false, deceptive. They are illusory, the prattle of fools. Kama tucca, or anicca kama tucca, musa mosa dhammang, maya katametang, balalapanang. So just as we went through earlier, if we can reject sensual pleasures by seeing the truth about them, and to see that nibbana is what is really true and undeceptive, then this is what helps us to get out of Mara's cage and to get out of samsara and the whole mess of suffering. At that point in the meditation, after developing some insight, we can make that very firm determination in our mind to get out using, say, for example, the Noble Eightfold Path or the basis of spiritual power or any other of the enlightenment path factors, so the Bodhipakya Dhammas. So just by seeing the truth, we establish right view and we renunciate sensual pleasures and sensual perceptions. And if our determination is to free ourselves, and if it's very strong, then our mind becomes vast, as the Buddha has said here, it becomes immeasurable, well developed, and we attain to the imperturbable. And so this is the first way to the imperturbable. So for some people, it might be the fourth jhana. Some people, it might go straight to the base of infinite space, or even for some people, it might be the base of infinite consciousness. So take a few moments just to digest that Dhamma, and then we'll move on to the next one. Okay, now we come to the second way directed to the imperturbable. So the Buddha says, again, bhikkhus, a noble disciple considers thus: there are sensual pleasures in this life and sensual pleasures in lives to come, sensual perceptions in this life and sensual perceptions in lives to come. Whatever material form there is, all material form is the four great elements, and the material form derived from the four great elements. When he practices in this way and frequently abides thus, his mind acquires confidence in this base. Once there is full confidence, he either attains to the imperturbable now, or else he resolves upon it with wisdom. On the dissolution of the body after death, it is possible that the evolving consciousness may pass on to rebirth in the imperturbable. This, bhikkhus, is declared to be the second way directed to the imperturbable. What this is saying is we derive sensual pleasures and sensual perceptions from whatever is material form. So we know this as rupa, but we also know this as the physical nutriment, kablinkara ahara, which is made up of the four great elements. If there is no material form or physical nutriment, then we wouldn't construct sensual pleasures or sensual perceptions. So we have done this meditation before. So we have looked at the four great elements in the Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta as part of our determination for wisdom, or Panya Adhitthana. And we've also contemplated it as part of our insight pathway, meditating on the Gatha, the verse in Chunda Sutta. And we've also looked at it when we've done the insight pathway for the Vammika Sutta. That's the first part of understanding why we burn during the day and smoke at night. So if you recall from any of those meditations, it's the same steps. We contemplate each of the four great elements by taking examples. So on this slide, it's got the words from the Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta, but essentially we contemplate the earth element, or the element of extension, internally and externally as not me and mine. So the sutta actually says, when we contemplate in terms of even the sutta in Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta is looking at the body in particular, it should be seen as it actually is with proper wisdom. Thus, this is not mine, I am not this is not myself. But for ease, I simply contemplate not me and mine. So the same thing for the water element, or the element of cohesion. Internally and externally, it's not me and mine. And when we contemplate the fire element, or the element of heat, internally and externally, we also contemplate that as not me and mine. And then lastly, the wind or air element, or element of motion, internally and externally, it's also not me and mine. So we would normally take our own examples because that's the only way. And so I won't go through all that again. We've actually done this many times before, and if you've forgotten, you can access those through the other sessions. But when we're able to see the four great elements with proper wisdom, as the Buddha would say, then it enables us to immediately abandon sensual pleasures and sensual perceptions, because they're actually built on material form, on kablinkara hara, the physical nutriment. So what we're saying is we see them as they really are, internally, externally. They're not me and mine. And so when we're free of this illusion or deception, that's how we can go beyond the four great elements, like the substantial part of form, and we can reach the imperturbable. So in this case, when we do this way of meditation, this particular contemplation that the Buddha has asked us to do, we actually reach the base of infinite space. And so this becomes the second way directed to the imperturbable. Now, in terms of what the Buddha has said about a person after death with the breakup of the body, that they can be reborn to such and such a realm, if we attain to the base of infinite space and we develop the mind really well, can steady it, and at the point of death we can also do that, then what the suttas say, there's a sutta called Āneñjasappāya Sutta in Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 3, discourse number 116. It says, in terms of being reborn to the devas of the base of the infinity of space or infinite space, some person enters and dwells in the base of the infinity of space. He relishes it, desires it, and finds satisfaction in it. If he is firm in it, focused on it, often dwells in it, and has not lost it, when he dies, he is reborn in companionship with the devas of the base of the infinity of space. The lifespan of the devas of the base of infinity of space is 20,000 eons. So that's by way of information about that. And of course, we know from the Buddha's teachings, he encourages us to realize Nibbana, not to actually be born to these places. And as we know, if one doesn't have noble attainment, then one still is in danger of the swings and roundabouts of samsara. One can still drop to the lower realms. But if one has noble attainment, then there is some safety, because one could complete the life in this particular realm and finish it there after a very, very long time, realize Nibbana. But if one doesn't have noble attainment and goes to such and such a place, and you would understand that all of us have been reborn to places such as this, then without noble attainment, we are at the mercy of being reborn to birth in different places, depending on our merit balances. So that's the second way. Now we come to the third way, directed to the imperturbable. So this is the last one that the Buddha talks about in this particular set. Again, bhikkhus, a noble disciple considers thus: sensual pleasures in this life and sensual pleasures in life to come, sensual perceptions in this life and sensual perceptions in life to come, material forms in this life and material forms in life to come, perceptions of forms in this life and perceptions of forms in life to come. Both alike are impermanent. What is impermanent is not worth delighting in, not worth welcoming, not worth holding to. When he practices in this way and frequently abides thus, his mind acquires confidence in this base. Once there is full confidence, he either attains to the imperturbable now, or else he resolves upon it with wisdom. On the dissolution of the body after death, it is possible that the evolving consciousness may pass on to rebirth in the imperturbable. This, bhikkhus, is declared to be the third way directed to the imperturbable. Here the bhikkhu has expanded on the initial four and added another four things which are impermanent, or anicca in Pali. And so the 8 things are: sensual pleasures in this life are impermanent, sensual pleasures in life to come are impermanent, sensual perceptions in this life are impermanent, sensual perceptions in life to come are impermanent, material forms in this life are impermanent, material forms in life to come are impermanent. And then he's also added perceptions of form in this life are impermanent, perceptions of form in lives to come are impermanent. So all these things are to be seen as impermanent, and we are to contemplate what is impermanent is not worth delighting in, not worth welcoming, not worth holding on to. So this is similar to how we contemplate in the Samadhi Bhavana Sutta. So you remember this as Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 22, discourse number 5. So we don't take delight, na binandati, not welcoming, na biwadati, not remaining holding to, na josaya titati. So if we take up the Buddha's instructions and see these 8 things, which are all associated with the physical nutriment or form as impermanent, that they're not worth delighting in, not worth welcoming, not worth holding on to, then this is another way that we can reach the imperturbable, which in this case is the base of infinite space. Or actually, if we are meditating from scratch, we reach the base of infinite space. But if we have developed from the last meditation, where we've already reached the base of infinite space, then if we're developing from there, if we contemplate that the base of infinite space is constructed and also impermanent, that it's not worth delighting in, not welcoming, not holding on to, then we can reach the base of infinite consciousness. So this is the third way directed to the imperturbable. So if we're talking about the base of infinite space, the Āneñjasappāya Sutta also states that someone here enters and dwells in the base of the infinity of consciousness. He relishes it, desires it, and finds satisfaction in it. If he is firm in it, focused on it, often dwells in it, and has not lost it when he dies, he is reborn in companionship with the devas of the base of the infinity of consciousness. The lifespan of the devas of the base of infinity of consciousness is 40,000 eons. So when you read these particular extracts from Āneñjasappāya Sutta, you see that the key thing is someone relishes this particular concentration, desires it, finds satisfaction on it. So the volition of this person is attaching to this. It gets the pleasurable feeling from this. And so it's constructing those imperturbable volitional formations saying, yes, let consciousness steady here. And so at the point of death, if one has this kind of mentality, desire, then that's how one gets reborn there. And so Buddha tells us this is what happens, but what he does through Āneñjasappāya Sutta is to actually there's more to develop here. And if you develop your mind, you see, oh, you don't want to desire that's substandard. Do a little more until you get to the base of neither perception or non-perception. Then he says that's the best of what you can do, but it's still not the best of the best in regards to what one can develop, because really the ultimate safety is nibbana. So we will see that by the time we get to the end of this sutta. So now we come to the first of the 3 ways directed to the base of nothingness. So here the Buddha says, again, bhikkhus, a noble disciple considers thus: sensual pleasures in this life and sensual pleasures in life to come, sensual perceptions in this life and sensual perceptions in life to come, material forms in this life and material forms in life to come, perceptions of form in this life and perceptions of forms in life to come, and perceptions of the imperturbable. All are perceptions. Where these perceptions cease without remainder, that is peaceful, that is sublime, namely the base of nothingness. When he practices in this way and frequently abides thus, his mind acquires confidence in this base. Once there is full confidence, he either attains to the base of nothingness now, or else he resolves upon it with wisdom. On the dissolution of the body, after death, it is possible that the evolving consciousness may pass on to rebirth in the base of nothingness. This, bhikkhus, is declared to be the first way directed to the base of nothingness. So building on our meditation, having attained to the base of infinite consciousness, we are now contemplating this first way directed to the base of nothingness. So again, we have contemplated this in a similar way before. So if we refer to the Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta, the Buddha says a person consists of 6 elements. So it was said, and with reference to this, was this said, there are the earth element, the water element, the fire element, and the air element. So we've already done that meditation that we've looked at the 4 great elements. Then the space element. So we've already cultivated that. And now the Buddha also includes the consciousness element. So if we give up all 6 elements, what are we left with? We're left with no elements. We're left with no things. Nothing. So this is what it means by the base of nothingness. None of these 6 elements are there. So when we attain to and remain in the base of infinite consciousness, we've already given up the 4 great elements in our earlier meditation, and then we've given up the base of infinite space, because now we're just clinging to the feeling of infinite consciousness. So if we're intent on attaining to the base of nothingness using this method, then we do not want to delight in feeling. We do not want to welcome feeling. We do not want to remain holding on to feeling. So we know that from the links in dependent origination, with contact as condition, feeling arises. With the cessation of contact comes a cessation of feeling. So in the Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta, the Buddha gives the simile of the fire sticks. And he says if there's contact and friction between the two fire sticks, heat is generated and fire is produced. So if we separate the two fire sticks, then heat ceases and it subsides. So in the same way, when there's no contact, there's a cessation of feeling. So when we follow the Buddha's instructions, when we're in this base of infinite consciousness and we determine to give up all the 6 elements, and in this case of the last one being the consciousness element, this means we give up any craving for feeling. In other words, similar to the Samadhi Bhavana Sutta meditation, we do not take delight, na binandati, we do not welcome, na biwadati, we do not remain holding to feeling, na josaya titati, about Vedana. So if we do the meditation correctly, then in this way we're also able to enter into the base of nothingness. And this is where all perceptions, so when the Buddha talks about these perceptions, he's talking about giving up sensual perceptions, the perceptions of form in the earlier part of our meditation, and now the perceptions of the imperturbable. They also cease without remainder. And so we directly experience the base of nothingness. And this is certainly more peaceful, more sublime than the imperturbable, so what we experienced before. So this is the first way directed to the base of nothingness. So as you can see, so far we are able to do these meditations because we've discussed them before in previous sessions, and if you've practiced them, then it's not dissimilar to what we've practiced before. And in the Āneñjasappāya Sutta, the Buddha says, some person here enters and dwells in the base of nothingness. He relishes it, desires it, and finds satisfaction in it. If he is firm in it, focused on it, often dwells in it, and has not lost it when he dies, he is reborn in companionship with the devas of the base of nothingness. And the lifespan of the devas of the base of nothingness is 60,000 eons. So again, if one develops the mind very well in this respect, it's possible to pass away and determine out of craving and also taking delight in these things, to be reborn in companionship with the devas of the base of nothingness. But there's always danger in that, as we mentioned before. So now we come to the second way directed to the base of nothingness. And this second way is a little more advanced than the previous one. So here the Buddha says, again, bhikkhus, a noble disciple gone to the forest or to the root of a tree or to an empty hut considers thus, this is void of a self or of what belongs to a self. When he practices in this way and frequently abides thus, his mind acquires confidence in this base. Once there is full confidence, he either attains to the base of nothingness now, or else he resolves upon it with wisdom. On the dissolution of the body after death, it is possible that the evolving consciousness may pass on to rebirth in the base of nothingness. This, bhikkhus, is declared to be the second way directed to the base of nothingness. This is another contemplation that we have done before. There's an easy version of it in terms of how the steps, and there's also another one where we use a sutta in order to do it more deeply. So, or there's 2 suttas anyway, but depending on one's skill and insight, whether one has already established noble attainment, then it can be really quick actually to attain to the base of nothingness using these particular instructions. So you remember that we've had a session where we've talked about if it is impermanent, suffering, and subject to change, is it worth taking as me and mine? That's really what this is about. And if we explain it in a little more detail, how the Buddha actually uses this formula, it's when he teaches his disciples, say for example in the Ānanda Sutta, and this is in Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 22, discourse number 159. Here the Buddha asks Venerable Ānanda, and he's done this before with even his Venerable Rahula and many other bhikkhus. He said, if form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, are they permanent or impermanent? And so Venerable Ananda answers impermanent. And then the Buddha asks, if what is impermanent is suffering or happiness, Venerable Ananda then answers, it's suffering. So then Buddha asks, is what is impermanent suffering and subject to change fit to be regarded as me and mine? And Venerable Ananda answers no. So we usually think about these 5 aggregates as permanent, pleasurable, not subject to change. Just think about the people in our lives. We often think that they're going to be there in the next moment. And of course, because we take them as subha, nicca, we have pleasure through them, we take them as mine. So this is how we normally regard the 5 aggregates. So when we see the 5 aggregates as something of substance, something that is valuable to us, then of course we're going to take it as me and mine, take it as self. But when we do the contemplation, like going through the questions that the Buddha has asked Venerable Ananda, or to actually say to ourselves as a meditation, if it is impermanent, suffering, and subject to change, is it worth taking as me and mine? Is it fit to be regarded as me and mine? Then what happens with our contemplation, if we take our own examples, we realize actually that's true. It is impermanent. It is suffering. It is subject to change. And so it's not to be regarded as me and mine. And so with the strong insight from the meditation, we can reach the base of nothingness very quickly. And if the insight from the contemplation is very powerful, so more like when you contemplate and you go deeper into it and it's very powerful in regard to not taking it as me and mine, and then the mind gets really well developed, then what is possible is to attain to liberation of the mind through voidness, so sunyata ceto vimukti. So that's also very possible. And so this is one contemplation to do as a part of this second way directed to the base of nothingness. A similar contemplation that I'll offer as well is from the Sunyata Loka Sutta. This is Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 35, discourse number 85. And this is where the Buddha explains what it means by empty is the world to Venerable Ananda. And so it reads, then the Venerable Ananda approached the Blessed One and said to him, Venerable Sir, it is said, empty is the world, empty is the world. In what way, Venerable Sir, is it said, empty is the world? It is, Ananda, because it is empty of self and what belongs to self. Sunyang atena wa attaniyena, that it is said, empty is the world. And what is empty of self and what belongs to self? And so the Buddha says, the I, Ananda, is empty of self and of what belongs to self. Forms are empty of self and of what belongs to self. I consciousness is empty of self and of what belongs to self. I contact is empty of self and of what belongs to self. Whatever feeling arises, and it goes on through the different faculties, and ends with mind contact as condition. Whatever pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, that too is empty of self and what belongs to self. It is, Ananda, because it is empty of self and of what belongs to self, that it is said, empty is the world. So this is a very important sutta and a very lovely sutta to contemplate as a way to access the base of nothingness. Because if one really spends time doing this particular contemplation, it can be very powerful. So the first thing to clarify is what the Buddha means by the world. So in the Lokapanya Sutta, this is in Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 35, discourse number 82. A certain bhikkhu approached the Buddha and asked, Venerable Sir, it is said the world, the world. In what way, Venerable Sir, is it said the world? And so the Buddha says, it is disintegrating, bhikkhu. Therefore, it is called the world. So the word that he uses in Pali is paloka. So disintegrating. The world is disintegrating. And then the question is, and what is disintegrating? And so the Buddha again says very similar things. The I bhikkhu is disintegrating. Forms are disintegrating. I consciousness is disintegrating. I contact is disintegrating. And whatever feeling arises with eye contact as condition, that too is disintegrating. And it goes through the rest of it. And so what you see is we construct the world out of these sense bases, sense spheres, and the concoction of our eye consciousness to create contact, and then the feeling and all of that. That is the world. And that is the world that is disintegrating, that we think is substantial, that we think is not void or empty. So that's the context for understanding that. And when we contemplate the Buddhist instructions in this particular sutta, the Sunyata Loka Sutta that we've just read out, what we're contemplating is this world through the sixth sense experience that is disintegrating, that we are taking as substantial, not void, not empty. So if you really think about it, if the world is seen through the sixth sense as disintegrating, then of course it's impermanent. Of course it's suffering and subject to change, similar to our previous contemplation. And so if it's suffering, then it's not fit to be regarded as me and mine. It's actually empty or void of self, of me and mine. There's a danger in that. So in any case, to do this actual contemplation using the Sunyata Loka Sutta, we methodically go through the I is not me and mine. Forms are not me and mine. Eye consciousness is not me and mine. Therefore, eye contact is not me and mine. Whatever feeling that arises with eye contact is conditioned. Whether it's pleasant, painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, that too is also me and mine. The same with the ear. Ear is not me and mine. Sounds are not me and mine. Ear consciousness is not me and mine. Therefore, ear contact is not me and mine. And whatever feeling that arises with ear contact as condition, that too is also not me and mine. The same with the nose. That's not me and mine. Odors are not me and mine. Nose consciousness is not me and mine. Therefore, whatever nose contact is not me and mine. And whatever feeling that arises with nose contact as condition is not me and mine. And then we go through the tongue, the body, and the associated faculties and consciousness. And then lastly, the mind, that's not me and mine. Mental phenomena is not me and mine. Mind consciousness is not me and mine. Therefore, mind contact is not me and mine. And whatever feeling that arises with mind contact, whether painful, pleasant, or neither painful nor pleasant, that too is also not me and mine. So that's so comprehensive. Essentially, everything that makes up our world, our sensory world, it's actually empty or void of self, not to be misapprehended as me and mine. We shouldn't identify with it, because what we're doing with this contemplation, and the one that we previously went through about if it is impermanent, suffering, and subject to change, it is not fit to be regarded as me and mine. What we're saying is we're correcting the perversion in our view. We're cleaning up the wrong view in order to do this. And so when we do that, that's how we reach the base of nothingness, because it's empty of the world and everything that belongs to the world. So what becomes very clear when you go through it in this way is we need to understand the aging phenomena, jara Dhamma. So we've spoken about this on a number of sessions. And if you understand about the aging phenomena in regards to each sense base, each sense object, the sense consciousness, then you start to see why the Buddha gives the teaching in this way. And so what we like to do in contemplating this is to be able to see that whole process, like what drives what we construct and reconstruct, that it's really flawed. That when we deeply understand that and see that by not understanding jara Dhamma, we get caught and bound to suffering. But when we see that it's truly void of self, void of belonging to self, that the world that we take refuge in is not to be trusted. And so that's how we attain in this way to the base of nothingness. So again, if the insight from this contemplation is very strong, the mind is very well developed in not taking anything as me and mine, seeing this world as empty of self and empty of what is belonging to self, then we reach sunyata ceto vimukti. So liberation of the mind through voidness is also possible. So that's the second way directed to the base of nothingness. So now we come to the third way, in terms of the base of nothingness. And this is even more advanced than the previous two ways. And there's actually some very deep Dhammas throughout a lot of these talk about the base of nothingness. There are actually very deep Dhammas that can be used here. But for this session, what I've chosen to do is stick to what is a bit more simplified, because I think stick closer to the suttas, stick closer to what is simple rather than complicated. So again, with this one, there is a more complicated and detailed way to go into this, but I'm going to touch on it in a simplified way. So the Buddha says, again, because a noble disciple considers thus, I am not anything belonging to anyone anywhere, nor is there anything belonging to me in anyone anywhere. When he practices in this way and frequently abides thus, his mind acquires confidence in this base. Once there is full confidence, he either attains to the base of nothingness now, or he resolves upon it with wisdom. On the dissolution of the body after death, it is possible that the evolving consciousness may pass on to rebirth in the base of nothingness. This because is declared to be the third way directed to the base of nothingness. So those with noble attainment will find, when they contemplate this thoroughly, and when they contemplate it with the deeper Dhammas, so some of what we probably won't go through here, what one can find is that it's possible to reach āneñjasappāya Sutta, so the taintless state of the mind, and that is particularly so with those who have noble attainment. So that is possible. Now, interestingly, with this particular phrase, I am not anything belonging to anyone anywhere, nor is there anything belonging to me in anyone anywhere, this is also referred to in the Pali Canon in two other places. And one instance is with reference to one of the four Brahman truths, so their way of practicing and what they hold as the truth, declared by the Buddha when he spoke about the four Brahman truths to a group of wanderers. And it's interesting because he's qualified to talk about it because he trained in this at the time under Alara Kalama, but also he would have seen the truth after he attained fully perfected as the Buddha. So this particular one appears in Brahmana Satcha Sutta, Anguttara Nikaya chapter 4, discourse number 185. And I reference it only because in addition to the phrase, the Brahmins actually also state the Brahmin does not on that account misconceive himself as an ascetic or as a Brahmin. He does not misconceive I am better or I am equal or I am worse. Rather, having directly known the truth in that, he is practicing the path of nothingness. So we see for the Brahmins, it was a method of practicing a path towards nothingness. And the Buddha proclaimed the truth to these wanderers, having realized it with direct knowledge himself. The other reference is to the Niganthas, or the those that practiced in terms of non-possessiveness. That was their way of practice. And so this appears in the Uposatha Sutta, which we've been through before in Anguttara Nikaya, where the Buddha was explaining to Visakha the distinction between the Uposatha observed by the cowherds versus the Niganthas, and versus how the Buddha would observe the Uposatha and encourage others to observe the Uposatha. So we don't need to go into this. There's no real instructions on that. What we want to focus on is how the Buddha would ask us to practice this. So what I have chosen to use is the Chandana Sutta, which is Samyutta Nikaya chapter 2, discourse number 15, as a simplified way of looking at it. So in the Chandana Sutta, a young Deva visited the Buddha and he uttered this particular verse. One who desists from sensual perception, who has overcome the fetter of form, who has destroyed delight in existence, he does not sink in the deep. So as we know, many of the verses, these gathas that appear in the suttas, they're very, very deep. They're never just simply words. And this is one that the Buddha endorsed. He didn't correct or anything like that. So when we read that sutta, this particular verse, and it talks about someone who refrains from sensual perception, who fully understands form and so overcomes the fetter of form, and who doesn't take delight in existence, so has destroyed that, and therefore doesn't sink into the deep, vast sea of samsara, that's not us. So we can fully admit that we don't fulfill this yet. So instead of what this says, what we do is we still indulge. So we indulge in sensual pleasures rather than, or sensual perceptions, sorry, rather than desist from them, refrain from them. Meaning we keep inclining towards sensual thoughts, even in the higher concentrations. So it's in the gross level, it could be sensual thoughts about our job, our career, our possessions, but it's more refined when we have these sensual perceptions towards Dhamma knowledge, the fruits of our meditation, the actual meditation attainments itself. So what this means is we haven't overcome the fetter of form. We still misapprehend form as attractive and pleasing, and we, in our meditation, we're still attached to the properties of form, even in the higher concentrations, and we start to take them as permanent because particularly with our sensual perceptions in the higher concentrations, they're so stable and steady as we go from the imperturbable to the base of nothingness. And then eventually, after this one, we go towards the base of neither perception or non-perception. We can easily misapprehend if we don't take the Buddha's instructions, just like Alara Kalama and later Uddaka Ramaputta, to think that it's permanent and lasting, and then we identify with it, take it as me and mine. And so rather than seeing the truth about impermanence and about seeing it as subha, and what we do is we lie to ourselves and we say, oh, there's pleasure here, it's sukha. We ignore the fact that we can fall from these concentrations, that they're actually not lasting. And so we start to value something based on lies. So if we take it as pleasurable, what our volition is happy to associate with is the properties of form in the meditation, and to lift the feeling, to lift that pleasurable feeling, saying, my perception is saying it's subha, nicca, sukha. And so what we start to do is we can start to construct volitional formations in accordance with that. And our conceit is playing its part too. I can get to these higher concentrations. I can last here and I can dwell here, not knowing that dwelling there is linked with hatred. So if we take an example to connect with this Dhamma, let's say we're doing reasonably well in life. We have a good job, our family's doing well, we have a good home. And then one day we get invited to our school reunion and we meet up with an old friend, and this particular friend amongst our other friends is the one that is extremely successful and very wealthy, done really well compared to everybody else. And so as we talk to them, we start thinking, how did they succeed? Like, how did they get so wealthy? And then while we're catching up with them, we find out that their success is mainly due to investing in gold and Bitcoin. And so we start thinking, maybe I should be like my friend. I should start to invest all of our savings into gold and Bitcoin. Maybe go all in. And so what is happening is we're developing volition, thinking, I can produce the same result by doing what my friend is doing. And I'll get the same kind of pleasure. People will respect me. I'll be associated with being successful and wealthy. And if I can get these particular returns in the same way on gold and Bitcoin, then, from that gold and Bitcoin, we start thinking, having sensual thoughts about, from that windfall, I'll buy a bigger house. We'll dine out at 5-star restaurants. We'll travel the world. We'll upgrade all the cars for the family. We'll pay off this and that for various loved ones, and so on. So at this point, we're caught up in the lies. We don't see the truth about form, which is the gold, the Bitcoin, the houses, the cars, the people, the food, all of that. And from the volition, we keep developing both the form and the feeling. We keep going back to it, and we keep assuring ourselves about, we can lift this feeling. It's worth it. And so our volition is very focused on that. And our perceptions are sick, but we trust it, thinking, it's true. But they're actually unprofitable perceptions that we're leaning on to construct what's happening in our mind factory. So what you actually see, if you take an example like this, you see that the mind is starting to shake quite heavily. Because you start to see, it's shaking so heavily. And we've already taken it as me and mine. We've already identified with all of this at the mental level. It can even be done without physically doing it, physically going out and doing these things. It can be built up in our mind. So you can see how we direct through volition, our volitional formations, and our consciousness is steady in all these things. So we become happy. As a result of that, we become happy to associate with this kind of sensuality. We take delight in it and we hold to existence. So rather than destroying delight in existence, we actually hold on to it because we think, oh, there's something substantial and valuable here. Like we look up to that friend that we've met at the school reunion and we think, oh, that friend is able to have lasting pleasure doing that. How great is that? And so it's with conceit that says, well, I went all in, like say we've done it and we think, oh, I went all in with gold and Bitcoin. I took the chance. I made the windfall. Look at me. I've succeeded. Look at the material wealth. Look at my status. Look at the groups I now belong to. See how I'm going to keep the gold and Bitcoin working for me. I can make this last. So what in reality happens is we are really saying to ourselves, I can exist like this. And with the conceit, we would always start to think, well, I've done this before and I can do it again. So I can make this existence pleasurable. So if we have this kind of delusion, then we keep developing the form, the feeling, and the volition. And so the whole process keeps turning. So we're happy to belong to anyone, anywhere, for others to take as me and mine. And we're also happy to have things belonging to me. So taking them as me and mine. And so we can see that at the gross level, and it's also possible to take an example at a deeper level, at a more refined, subtle level with our concentrations. So the problem is when we deeply contemplate this scenario or any other scenario that may be relevant to you, we can see that our perceptions are actually empty and hollow. That's what is helping us to construct this. And they actually have no substance. We're actually lying to ourselves. So we come back to what Buddha has said about sensual perceptions that are a part of the sensual pleasures. They're impermanent, they're hollow, they're lies, they're false, they're deceptive, and they're illusory, prattle of fools. So even with the example we went through just then, you can see it. And so these lies are steeped in delusion, and this is also what has brought us back into this particular birth. And so they don't produce what we expect them to. Instead, the result would be suffering in this life and in lives to come. And so that's the bigger picture that we need to take on board when we look at this third way, directed towards nothingness. So we've lied about form as pleasing, permanent, taken it as pleasurable, but it's really not these things. And our perception is really like the mirage. So if we think about the Penapindupama Sutta again, the Buddha used that simile of a mirage for perception, that he says the same words. It's void, it's hollow, it's insubstantial. It will just evaporate. So if we can see this and do this contemplation, then we can attain to the base of nothingness. And so we need to give up this kind of process that we do. Otherwise, what we'll continue to do, as this Gatha, this verse is saying, is, well, we will continue to sink into the deep or the vast sea of samsara, still bound to Mara's realm, Mara's hunting ground, Mara's bait, and Mara's domain. What we want to be able to do is what this Gatha says. We want to give up the sensual perceptions, see how much they lie to us, overcome the fetter of form, and not delight in existence, whether it is in the gross realms or whether it is in the more subtle and refined realms, because we don't want to sink deeper. So with this particular contemplation, this third one, take an example and contemplate the Dhamma. So again, this is a simplified version of the third way, directed to the base of nothingness, and hopefully you're able to contemplate and see whether it bears some fruit. Now we come to the base of neither perception nor non-perception. So never sanya, asanya, ayatana. Again, the bhikkhus, or the Buddha says, again, bhikkhus, a noble disciple considers thus. sensual pleasures in this life and sensual pleasures in life to come, sensual perceptions in this life and sensual perceptions in lives to come, material forms in this life and material forms in lives to come, perceptions of forms in this life and perceptions of forms in lives to come, perceptions of the imperturbable and perceptions of the base of nothingness. All are perceptions. Where these perceptions cease without remainder, that is the peaceful, that is the sublime, namely the base of neither perception nor non-perception. When he practices in this way and frequently abides thus, his mind acquires confidence in this base. Once there is full confidence, he either attains to the base of neither perception nor non-perception now, or else he resolves upon it with wisdom. On the dissolution of the body after death, it is possible that the evolving consciousness may pass on to rebirth in the base of neither perception nor non-perception. This bhikkhus is declared to be the way directed to the base of neither perception nor non-perception. Again, we have done this meditation before, and there are a number of ways to access the base of neither perception or non-perception. So I'll go through a few of the ways. So the first one is to contemplate perception is impermanent to the extent that constructed volitional formations are not me and mine. So we have explained this before, but again we can apply what we learned from the Samadhi Bhavana Sutta, that if we seek delight, abhinandati, welcome, abhiwadati, and remain holding, ajosaya tititi, to perception, then delight arises with delight as condition, clinging, and so on. So you can see the arising process here. And what we really want to do is to, when we see that, we actually want to run the passing away. So nabhinandati, nabhiwadati, najosaya titati. We don't take delight, we don't welcome, we don't remain holding to any of these perceptions. So these are all the perceptions that the Buddha has run through, from sensual perceptions all the way up to the perceptions of the base of nothingness. So when we contemplate in this way, what we're seeing is that perceptions are actually impermanent, because this is what Samadhi Bhavana actually shows us. And so this is one way of attaining to the base of neither perception nor non-perception. So when we talk about the degree to which we can apply impermanence to perception, that it depends on the extent to which we see constructed volitional formations as not mine, I recommend going to the Chula Sunyata Sutta session, because that's where we explain it in a little more detail. And even in the Chula Sunyata Sutta, a lot of the detail around how one knows one gets to these different attainments, whether it's infinite space, infinite consciousness, base of nothingness, and now this base of neither perception or non-perception, I go into much more detail about the description, and rather than repeat myself and take a long time, I'm not going to do it here. So I recommend, if you're interested and you haven't heard that particular session, then a lot more detail in terms of what one can expect, how you know that you've attained to those particular higher attainments, higher concentrations. So go to that particular sutta, Chula Sunyata Sutta, and I think I called it Real Emptiness. So that's the first way that one can use to reach the base of neither perception or non-perception. Again, we're very familiar with this Samadhi Bhavana Sutta, because we're really letting go of the clinging to the aggregates. Now, the other way that I've spoken of before, and I spoke about this in the Sunakata Sutta, because I actually found that Sunakata Sutta also talks about different methods. Some of them are the same as this, but the Buddha gives certain similes. And I haven't used or brought up the different similes for the other things that we've been through in Āneñjasappāya Sutta, because it's not really needed. But this one I think is actually very helpful, because in the Sunakata Sutta, the Buddha gives this simile about throwing up after eating delicious food. And it's so vivid and striking that it really helps to attain to the base of neither perception or non-perception. So the Buddha has said, suppose a person has eaten some delicious food and thrown it up. What do you think, Sunakata? Could that man have any desire to eat that food again? No, Venerable Sir. Why is that? Because that food is considered repulsive. So too, Sunakata, when a person is intent on the base of neither perception nor non-perception, his fetter of the base of nothingness has been rejected. He should be understood as a person not bound by the fetter of the base of nothingness, who is intent on the base of neither perception nor non-perception. So when we attain to the base of nothingness, what we have is only the perception. So what the Buddha is really showing us with this particular vivid simile is to see the sick nature of perceptions. So when we think about all the work that we've done in the Profitable Perception series, we know this to be true, that we do have a lot of sick perceptions. And even when we go to the base of nothingness, which this is focused on, all those perceptions that we are holding on to in the base of nothingness are actually sick. So when we meditated earlier, we realize that we perceive something as pleasing or attractive. We have this subha sanya, and we think that we can make it last, that we think the base of nothingness is actually anicca. So this is something that Alara Kalama, all of his students were thinking that. And out of this delusion, we actually take that pleasure, that it will last, and we take it as me and mine. And so when the pleasure changes, what results is actually sadness. And when you go into the base of nothingness, it's quite evident, particularly when you're trying to develop the base of nothingness, you actually see it like that. So the simile of a person eating delicious food and throwing it up or vomiting is about seeing perceptions as sick. So throwing up or vomiting, it represents the sick nature. And this is really understanding Vyadi Dhamma. So when we perceive, we go through mental volition as nutriment, so manosancetana ahara, that also has the sick nature. And so whatever volitional formations, whatever sankharas we construct out of these kinds of sick perceptions, they'll also have the sick nature. So our product that we are manufacturing from our mind factory, even at the base of nothingness, is actually faulty. So when we contemplate in this way, it's really powerful, because then you see, I'm constructing out of faulty things, sick things. And when I construct in this way, then that's when you get the insight. Basically, one realizes that the attainment of the base of nothingness, what we have is really perceptions of nothingness. And so if you recall from the Sunyata Loka Sutta, the one that we went through a couple of ones before, the Buddha explained to Venerable Ananda, it is because it is empty of self and of what belongs to self that it is said to be empty of the world. So in simple terms, when we perceive nothing or nothingness, we understand that it has nothing to do with self. But there's still the perception of even non-self, so, or not self, anatta sanya. And so that even that perception also has a sick nature. And so we're still constructing volitional formations that are sick. And so when we deeply contemplate that, then we truly realize, if we go according to the sutta, we wouldn't want to eat that. It's repulsive. And this is the way we go from the base of nothingness, away from the sickness, and enter into the base of neither perception or non-perception. So what we have in the base of neither perception or non-perception, we only have the volitional formations at that time of entering into the base of neither perception or non-perception. We're not constructing anything else. So we're not constructing new volitional formations out of sick perceptions, because we've actually removed them. So when we remove them, all we have are the remnants of that, only what is remaining. So this is what it means when Buddha says it's a person who does not eat the delicious food after throwing it up. That's how we enter into the base of neither perception or non-perception. So before we go to the next one, there's actually one final way. Maybe for some it might be a simpler way. So if we see that the perceptions in the base of nothingness are linked to delusion, linked to moha, if you have a very strong understanding of this particular part of the Dhamma, and we don't take these volitional formations as mine, these sankharas as mine, then that's another way of attaining to the base of neither perception or non-perception. So that seems like a simpler one, but if you understand the deeper Dhamma behind that, then that's another way. So these are the three kinds of contemplations directed towards the base of neither perception or non-perception. And before I read out this next one, just in terms of, for completeness, being reborn to the devas of the base of neither perception or non-perception, the Cetana Sutta, which is Anguttara Nikaya chapter 4, discourse number 171, it says, take a person who has given up the lower fetters. In the present life, they enter and abide in the dimension of neither perception or non-perception. They enjoy it and like it and find it satisfactory. If they abide in that and are committed to it and meditate on it, often without losing it, when they die, they're reborn in the company of the devas of the dimension of neither perception or non-perception. So this example that I've taken wasn't the one that I wanted, but it was the person who hadn't attained, doesn't have noble attainment, they can also go to the base of neither perception or non-perception through craving, through having developed this particular meditation. But they have the danger of falling from that if they don't have noble attainment. And what I just read out is someone who has noble attainment, and in this case it talks about a person who is a non-returner, then they would complete the rest of the path from the base of neither perception or non-perception. So, and the length of the lifespan in this particular place would be up to 84,000 eons. So it's a very long time. So let's now continue with the Āneñjasappāya discourse. So we're coming towards the end. When this was said, the Venerable Ānanda said to the Blessed One, Venerable Sir, here a bhikkhu is practicing thus. It might not be and it might not be mine. It will not be and it will not be mine. What exists, what has come to be, that I am abandoning. Thus he obtains equanimity, Venerable Sir. Does such a bhikkhu attain Nibbana? One bhikkhu here, Ananda, might attain Nibbana, another bhikkhu here might not attain Nibbana. And then he asks, what is the cause and reason, Venerable Sir, why one bhikkhu here might attain Nibbana, while another bhikkhu here might not attain Nibbana? And Buddha has said to him, here, Ananda, a bhikkhu is practicing thus. It might not be and it might not be mine. It will not be and it will not be mine. What exists, what has come to be, that I am abandoning. Thus he obtains equanimity, he delights in that equanimity, he welcomes it and remains holding to it, and he does so, his consciousness becomes dependent on it and clings to it. A bhikkhu with clinging Ananda does not attain Nibbana. The first part of the Buddha's answer to Venerable Ānanda's question about why a bhikkhu who obtains equanimity does not attain Nibbana is pretty straightforward. As we know from the Samadhi Bhavana Sutta, if one delights, welcomes, remains holding, so abhinandati, abhiwadati, adrasayatitati, to the equanimity level, then one's consciousness steadies there and clings to it. So the bhikkhu would not attain Nibbana, but would come back to another birth. So we understand this through the arising phenomena that we contemplate in Samadhi Bhavana Sutta. And also the Santatara Sutta, some people would actually take delight, as we've seen, and actually think, oh, it's so peaceful, it's so permanent. And so in the Santatara Sutta, this is in Itivuttaka, the Buddha has said the formless is more peaceful than the form realm, and cessation, of course, is more peaceful than the formless. And those beings who reach the form realm and those who establish in the formless, if they do not know cessation, they come back to the renewal of being. So they take up rebirth. So then Venerable Ānanda asked the Buddha, but Venerable Sir, when that bhikkhu clings, what does he cling to? To the base of neither perception nor non-perception, Ānanda. That's Buddha's answer. When that bhikkhu clings, Venerable Sir, it seems he clings to the best object of clinging. And Buddha answered, when that bhikkhu clings, Ānanda, he clings to the best object of clinging, for this is the best object of clinging, namely the base of neither perception nor non-perception. So this part, if we just pause there, this part is really interesting because we often presume that human birth is the best birth, or even some of the other higher realms are better births. But here the Buddha has confirmed to Venerable Ānanda the best birth or object of clinging is actually the base of neither perception or non-perception. And you can understand in terms of imperturbable, it's the one that really does not shake in terms of getting to the higher concentrations. And of course, we don't include cessation of feeling and perception there because that is actually part of Nirodha. But if you think about the levels of unshakability, the steadfastness, what is increasingly more peaceful and calm, then it makes sense. The base of neither perception or non-perception would be considered the best. And then when the Buddha went on to state, here, Ananda, a bhikkhu is practicing thus. It might not be and it might not be mine. It will not be and it will not be mine. What exists, what has come to be, that I am abandoning. Thus he obtains equanimity. He does not take delight or does not delight in that equanimity, welcome it, or remain holding. Since he does not do so, his consciousness does not become dependent on it and does not cling to it. A bhikkhu without clinging, Ananda, attains nibbana. So in this case, the bhikkhu says, Nabi nandati, nabi vadati, nachosaya titati, to the equanimity that he has obtained. And as a result, he stills his volitional formations and his consciousness is not steadying anywhere. He's not clinging to even the base of neither perception or non-perception. And so it becomes possible for the bhikkhu to attain nibbana. So this is the passing away phenomena again that we contemplate with Samadhi Bhavana Sutta. And I quite like the simile of the great bonfire as a contemplation. This is in the Upadana Sutta, where the Buddha has said, bhikkhus, when one dwells contemplating danger in things that can be clung to, craving ceases. With the cessation of craving comes cessation of clinging. With the cessation of clinging, cessation of existence, cessation of birth, cessation of aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and despair cease. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. So even as a contemplation, we can use it at any of the higher concentrations of the imperturbable, the base of nothingness, and of course the base of neither perception or non-perception, that if we're not clinging to even the perceptions of the base of neither perception or non, that we're not having any volition to construct volitional formations and allow consciousness to establish anywhere, then what we're saying is craving ceases. We're not clinging to anything. So craving ceases, and then dependent origination gets cut, and so it comes to nirodha. So it's really lovely. And the simile that the Buddha uses is, suppose a great bonfire was burning, consuming 10, 20, 30 or 40 loads of wood, and a man would not cast dry grass, dry cow dung, or dry wood into it from time to time. Thus, when the former supply of fuel is exhausted, that great bonfire, not being fed with any more fuel, lacking sustenance, would be extinguished. So too, when one lives contemplating danger in things that can be clung to, craving ceases. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. So it's quite lovely. And now we come to the final part of this Āneñjasappāya Sutta, and Venerable Ananda, of course, exclaimed, "It is wonderful, Venerable Sir, it is marvellous. The Blessed One indeed has explained to us the crossing of the flood independent upon one support or another." So Venerable Ananda is expressing how wonderful, as we would also express, that the Buddha has said that we can cross the flood by going from one support to another. And that is really what is so powerful about the Buddha's teachings and instructions, that if we see these as ways to gradually build safe support from which we can cross the flood, that this is how our wisdom grows, that you can see from each of these contemplations, we're growing in wisdom. We're starting to see what is getting stuck, starting to see how the process in our mind works, if you will, the mind factory, how it keeps leading us in the wrong direction. And that becomes really important, being able to gradually grow. So even from this session, don't be alarmed at how much Dhamma is being downloaded. In actual fact, one is meant to take time with a sutta like this. You take one part at a time and you practice it. And once you get good at that, you practice the next one like that. And so you don't overwhelm yourself. And in that way, it becomes something that is a really nice way to develop. So then Venerable Ananda asked, "But Venerable Sir, what is noble liberation?" Here, Ananda, a noble disciple considers thus. And so we see almost like Buddha's summary. Sensual pleasures in this life and sensual pleasures in lives to come. Sensual perceptions in this life and sensual perceptions in lives to come. Material forms in this life and material forms in lives to come. Perceptions of forms in this life and perceptions of forms in lives to come. Perceptions of the imperturbable. Perceptions of the base of nothingness. And perceptions of the base of neither perception or non-perception. This is identity as far as identity extends. This is the deathless, namely the liberation of the mind through not clinging. What the Buddha has given in his answer is a summary of all the things we've contemplated in order to construct what we could consider the spectrum of perception, starting from the mundane or gross, so sensual perceptions, all the way up to the very refined and subtle perceptions of the base of neither perception or non-perception. The best of what we construct, as we said before, are the perceptions of the base of neither perception or non-perception. And what the Buddha has also said is that whatever we have constructed from sensual pleasures, sensual perceptions, material forms, perceptions of forms, all the way to the perceptions of the base of neither perception or non-perception, this is identity. So in Pali, the word that is used here is sakkhayo, and also how far identity extends. So sakkhayo, although it's translated as identity, it literally translates as our own body or our own person. So this is similar to what the Buddha, which we referenced at the beginning when we're looking at the pathway of renunciation, where the Buddha talked about non-identification, attama yatang in Pali, attama yatang, I think that's how it's said, or not identifying or conceiving of the five aggregates as me and mine. So we use those things when we identify in the wrong way, but when we use the non-identification with these things, as we've gone through even in our meditations, that's the support for realizing Nibbana. So what the Buddha is saying in this particular sutta, Āneñjasappāya Sutta, that as we develop all the way up to the base of neither perception, we've been gradually going through this process of seeing the five aggregates that we cling to as impermanent, suffering, and not me and mine. So at the beginning, our mind is shaking from the start with sensual pleasures, as we were saying, shaking every day like that, shaking with sensual perceptions, shaking with the material forms and the perceptions of forms. We have misapprehended, as we said earlier, of all the wrong things and prattling on about them in the wrong way. And then as we've seen through the truth, we've gradually developed and seen the truth. So we see they're impermanent, hollow, false, deceptive, illusory, and we determine to abandon them. So in that sense, we stopped identifying with them. Then when we attain to the various ways of the higher concentration, so the different ways that we attain to the imperturbable, to the base of nothingness and the base of neither perception or non-perception, the Buddha's really taken us through all the possible constructions that we can take as our identity, that we can take refuge in, that we can identify with, to take as our own body or our own identity, even if it's the body that we take as the mind body. So this is something, if you see it, all constructions from gross to very subtle, we can fall for these things. That's why when sometimes people practice the base of nothingness at the time and even now, or the base of nothingness, neither perception nor non-perception, people say things, particularly with the base of nothingness, like I am that, because they have identified it as their own body, their own identity. So that is what the Buddha is asking us to see as we gradually use his instructions to develop through this process. So if we see how we construct that, and that it is a construction, and if we don't take any of these things as me and mine in any of the subtle ways, then with this wisdom we can determine not to cling to any of these constructions. We can stop volition towards anything. And if this is the case, then what the Buddha says is we can realize the deathless, amatang. We can realize noble liberation by not clinging to anything, not conceiving of anything, and stilling all our volitional formations. And so we end paticca samuppada. We don't, because we have wisdom, we have the noble knowledge, we don't activate from ignorance to volitional formations to consciousness, etc., etc. So the Buddha ends with the statement, thus, Ananda, I have taught the way directed to the imperturbable. I have taught the way directed to the base of nothingness. I have taught the way directed to the base of neither perception nor non-perception. I have taught the crossing of the flood, independence upon one support or another. I have taught noble liberation. What should be done for his disciples out of compassion by a teacher who seeks their welfare and has compassion for them, that I have done for you, Ananda. There are these roots of trees, these empty huts. Meditate, Ananda. Do not delay, or else you will regret it later. This is our instruction to you. And this is very heartfelt because we know Ananda did not attain the fruit of arahantship until after the Buddha had passed to parinibbana. And so you can see when he encourages here not to delay, but to cultivate that sense of urgency towards developing seclusion. And he means here physical seclusion, kaya viveka, mental seclusion, chitta viveka, which is the development of all these things, and seclusion from all acquisitions. It's a real heartfelt encouragement. And so we can take that in the same way to whatever degree we are able to develop and grow. We can take it in the same way as an encouragement from the Buddha. So I wanted to end the session with another sutta, just one more, and it's really because it's an encouragement, and it's from the Upaparika Sutta. As you know, I quite love these verses from the Buddha that have been collected by the name fails me at the moment, but Itivutika. So here the Buddha has said, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu should so investigate that as he investigates. His consciousness is not distracted and diffused externally, and internally is not fixed, and by not grasping anything, he should remain undisturbed. If his consciousness is not distracted and diffused externally, and internally is not fixed, and if by not grasping anything he remains undisturbed, then there is no coming into existence of birth, aging, death, and suffering in the future. So I thought these Buddha's words are appropriate for what we've just gone through today, because it's not simply about attaining to higher concentrations, like as an attainment or as, look at me, this is what I can do, or something to claim. But it's something to ensure that by methodically going through the Buddha's words, by methodically contemplating and reaching these different levels of the imperturbable base of nothingness and base of neither perception or non-perception, we develop wisdom around what we grasp onto at different levels of our meditation. And when we also follow the instructions, we also see how we relinquish the things in a very methodical way, the things that we have been clinging onto at each more refined state. And so as we go through this process of investigating, this is how we become less and less perturbed, less and less shaken. And we keep developing the mind with wisdom so that we ultimately, what we want is to remove the ignorance and craving that keeps allowing paticca samuppada, dependent origination, to activate. And so the process of stilling our volitional formations becomes something that is possible for us, that we don't allow from that point consciousness to conceive or to construct anything. So it is not distracted or diffused externally, and it's not internally fixed. So it can become a really wonderful thing if we can see it that way, that this is an investigating process and it's a wisdom pathway. And so the Buddha finally said, when a bhikkhu has abandoned the 7 ties and cut the cord, his wandering on in births is finished. There is no renewal of being for him. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We've now come to the end of our Dhamma session. I actually wasn't sure whether it was going to take longer. So we can express our gratitude to the Buddha for these wonderful teachings. We can also express our gratitude to the noble ones who have realized the truth and continue to help and guide us to do the same. Let's also express gratitude to our other teachers, parents, good friends who encourage us on the Noble Eightfold Path. And we can share the merit of our wholesome time together with all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings be free from suffering. Blessings of the Triple Gem to all of you, wishing you all well. May you continue to grow in happiness in the Buddha's teachings, develop the Noble Eightfold Path, and grow in wholesome qualities. Teruan Saranai.